1992 to work with pastors and congregations and church leaders. One of the things that we do is we provide them advice on organization, structure, changes in management, changes in direction, strategic planning, and we deal with pastoral transitions and any type of church change.
So why would that be, if I'm a pastor, why would that be a pay value for me?
Churchwright is a pay value for a number of reasons. Number one, I've worked with more than 40 denominations over the years, so I have a lot of experience with what are best practices for churches and what works, and most specifically what doesn't work. Number two, direct one-on-one advice.
So what are some of the struggles you see churches going through that you could help me get an advantage on or learn from?
One of the struggles that I see is a church that just gets comfortable and has been doing the same thing for a while. The pastor loves the congregation loves the pastor, and they've been very contented with each other. But because they're contented, they've lost contact with the community that is around them. And so each year the congregation gets a little bit older. Each year the pastor gets a little bit older. And each year the space between that worshiping community and the neighborhood around the church gets a little wider. So one of the biggest struggles is to stay current and stay relevant, to reach out, to bring people into worship who might be near the church but are not yet in the church.
So are you talking about the culture of the church, or are you talking about everything from the operations, bookkeeping? Give me an idea of some of the scope that you would cover as your consulting practice, as Churchwright.
I do everything with churches about church operation, church leadership, church direction, structure of the building, organization, finances. What I do not work on is theology. That's what pastors and congregations have, and so I stay out of that area. I just work on making the church stronger. As I like to say, we try to do church right at Churchwright.
Yeah, so a lot of churches out there, at least my perception, because they're always seeking for, they're a nonprofit organization. How am I going to work with somebody like you that has a PhD after the name and is known in universities and has a great credibility? How am I going to work with you as a pastor?
One, I speak English, and two, I've been doing it for a long time with a lot of pastors. I've worked with congregations as small as 10 people in little tiny mountain towns like Shell, Wyoming, and I've worked with very large, sophisticated churches in some of the nation's biggest cities. So I think the best way to answer that is I've been doing it for a long time and have a lot of people who can testify to that.
So you work within my budget then, you work within my structure. It's not something that is canned. I mean, you're not looking for the Willow Creek Church, you're looking for what?
That's exactly right, because what you need in your congregation is totally different from what somebody needs in the church next door or in the mega church down the street or the house church that meets around the corner. Every church has a unique situation. I think in many ways churches are very much like family-owned businesses. Each family-owned business is a little bit separate, but it has the fact that everybody knows each other. They're connected. And so churches have a business-like aspect to them that has to be accomplished, but they are certainly not businesses. So I come in recognizing the difference between what is a faith-based way of leadership, what is servant leadership, in fact, and what is a kind of a corporate style model.
So if we were going to work together, how would the process be? If I had a church and you were going to come work with me, what would be what's the process?
First process would be to get acquainted. Take a look at my website, talk with me on the phone. Let's have a leadership visit with you and a conference call with some of your church leaders and find out whether there's a fit or not. And if so, do that. We'll get it set up. Be happy to do that. There's no charge for that. That gets us acquainted. If you find that we're working together and we're building a relationship that's positive, then we can look at the next steps. I don't know what those next steps are because that's unique for your situation. So in that process, I would ask, what are you doing? Are you comfortable with where you are? Where do you want to be going? What does it look like to you? What do the numbers look like for your congregation? What's the age structure of your congregation? How's your budget? How's the faith? Is there dissension in the church? Is there comfort in the church? Are people anxious for change? Is the community going through change? In other words, we would get acquainted with each other. When we know exactly what's going on, then it's possible to then say, what's the next step?
Is there a time frame involved in this? I mean, that sounds very in-depth. I mean, do you just come in one time, two times, quick fix, or is this a long-term process?
I've worked in a number of ways. One is to do the startup work and then do a leadership retreat and then a follow-up period. So that would be a period of 2 or 3 months working together. Many times I'll do a workshop for pastors, and then the pastors will say, this has been very valuable, I've learned a lot. Do you do any coaching? And the answer is yes, I certainly do. And I've worked with pastors. Most of the pastors that started with me in coaching have been with me forever and continue to do that. So the answer is it can be short-term or long-term depending on what your needs are.
You know, one of the questions that comes up is that a lot of people go to a church because they get used to it, they like it, they think they like it, and I call some of those people the church ladies. Like, I've been to church and I sat in their spot in the pew and they were upset. And now you're trying to come in and change the church. What do you do for the congregation, the church ladies, to get them to understand that the church needs to reinvent itself but not lose its faith?
So one of the things that I like to do is to look at very gradual change. So we begin with where are you in your faith journey? Where are you in your leadership journey? What is important to you? Are you willing personally to make some changes? Without an individual decision by the church leaders to make a change, there can't be any change that will work. And number 2, what happens to the people you see every day? That small group of 3 or 4 or 5 people who are with you. Let's work with that group and then widen the circle, and then widen the circle beyond that, gradually bring in widening groups of leaders until finally you're involving the active members of the congregation. When you do it with a little circle, then widening out, widening out, and widening out, what you do is you have a real nice set of transformation, and that makes the difference. I found that if you try to do too much too fast, churches simply break. People put on the brakes, and not only are they not interested in that change, for years later they're going to say, no, we're not ever going to try change again. So it has to be done with wisdom, has to be done with compassion, it has to be done with respect for the nature of the systems within the church.
You know, Peter, I know people are going to want to call you, so I'm going to ask you for your phone number and website in just a second. But give me 3 things. If I'm a pastor, whether I call you or not, what are 3 things that I need to think about that would help me sustain my church and my congregation? What are 3 things?
Number 1 is discernment. What does it mean to be a leader? And most specifically, what does it mean to be a leader in our time, our century? and how are you fulfilling that? Number 2, how are you communicating your leadership with the church? Are you communicating with the tools and techniques that you used from 10 years ago or 5 years ago in our very changing society, or are you staying current? Are you reaching within the congregation and doing that, or are you reaching outside of the congregation to touch needs that are in the community? And unless there are on-ramps into the congregation from the congregation will love each other, but it will not grow. Number 3, one of the biggest things is, what do you want to accomplish? What is your vision for that church? And how do you articulate it? How do you share it? And most of all, how do you communicate that with the folks in the church? Finally, hold all things together. It says in Scripture that the way that to do things, the path of discernment, is to hear gently, or not so gently, the voice of God. One of my favorite hymns is a song that has the second line is, "Here I raise my Ebenezer." It seems strange, and nobody knows these days what that means. But that was the stone on which Jacob wrote, "This is my path, this is who I am." Each time we have to say in our prayer, "Dear God, I think I know who I am, but erase that from my ego and write it in my heart so I know exactly who I am." And when we do that, together we raise who we are, and we can share that with authentic witness.
Great, Peter. Thanks. One last thing. How do we get a hold of you?
Easiest way is to dial right here on the web and find me, churchwright.org, or call me, and the telephone number's on the screen. Best way, 702-493-3374. Thanks. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's good.